Morning. Delighted to have Sai Deepak with us in the Pondi Lit Fest 2019 edition. Um, the first thing I quite want to ask you is you are a lawyer by profession. You started out as being an engineer. What brings you to the Indic cause, and what is it you're trying to achieve via the Indic collective movement?
So my own transition from an engineer to a lawyer is primarily because of the need that I felt for making a difference to the Indic movement, so to speak, because I felt that I had a few skill sets that I could bring to bear to the cause. One of the things that I felt that this side was lacking when I was an engineer, that is between 2002 to 2006, was a good number of articulate voices which could explain the Indic position with respect to a lot of issues which were then raging issues and continue to be raging issues even today. And around the final semester of my engineering, or the penultimate semester, is when I was torn between continuing with my life as an engineer or getting into public life in some way or the other. And the options that were before me at that stage was either opting for life as a civil servant or take up law as a profession. And I decided to take up law because I felt that it gives you better access to how the system works, the overall, the schema, the framework of the structure, and at some stage also make policy changes if possible through legal interventions, provided you have enough experience under your belt. So that's one of the reasons that I decided to make that change. And fortunately for me, that was the time that a specialized degree was being introduced by IIT Kharagpur, which is an LLB with a specialization in intellectual property rights. So that way it allowed me to retain some semblance of a connection with my engineering roots, but also dive deep into the profession of law. So that's why I decided to take up this profession.
Within the causes that need intervention and help in the Indic movement, which are the ones that you think inspired you most in terms of taking this aspect of your life so seriously?
So I think as opposed to any specific issue, there are four baskets that I believe require serious attention. One would be culture stroke civilization, the other is education, the third is environment, and the fourth is national security. And civilization or culture, this basket itself is fairly vast, and within that, the one issue which I felt holds the key to Indic resurgence would be freedom of temples from government control. And this is a topic that several people before me have already spoken about. They have fought for it, and they've been doing so for the last 15-20 years. Notably, people like Mr. Nagarajan, Mr. T.R. Ramesh, and Ms. Radharajan, Swami Dayananda Saraswati ji, and a lot of people. And I was fortunate enough to be pulled into this cause thanks to the advice of a senior advocate from the Supreme Court, Sri C.S. Vaidyanathan, who asked me to work on the matter of the petition filed by Swami Dayananda Saraswati ji. And that effectively exposed me to this whole new world. And while I was clear that I wanted to contribute to the cause, I just couldn't telescope it and identify the specific causes that I could pursue with the limited skill sets that I have. And that's when I realized that I could contribute to this issue legally. And after that, once I started reading up on the issue more, I realized that this is perhaps the most important issue. While people assume that this is an elitist cause, I don't think it is. It is as practical as it gets because it has a cultural import, an economic import, a religious import, and perhaps even a general societal import. So that is one of the areas that I decided to commit myself to. And somehow the stars aligned, and I was gradually pulled into matters such as the Sabarimala matter, the Padmanabha Swami temple matter, now Jagannath Puri, and a lot of other causes. And apart from that, we realized the intimate nexus between sustaining the temple ecosystem and sustaining several livelihoods and professions which are gradually dying, and which could also have an economic angle to it because it creates a lot of livelihoods. And the fact that a flourishing temple ecosystem is also responsible for a flourishing ecological ecosystem, and because ultimately dharma at the heart of it is perhaps a restatement of the requirement of restraint and balance between individual avarice and societal responsibility. So that's how I got pulled into these causes. And then of course the issue of demographic balance, and therefore the issue of illegal immigration, and the need to prevent at least fraudulent and induced conversions, each of these issues. And at the heart of it, the pernicious effect of the current curricula on future denizens of the country, what education could do, either for good or bad. and therefore a need to indicize, so to speak, Indian education system. So which is why these verticals. And I was fortunate to meet a lot of like-minded and better informed and more erudite individuals, and that led to the creation of this organization called the Indic Collective Trust in June 2017. So I'm a professional litigator arguing before the Supreme Court day in and day out, so that's about 80% to 85% of my time. But I dedicate about 15% of my time to pro bono causes, which further the cause of Dharma. And I'm fortunate to have a lot of people who have helped me understand the position better and also try and give voice to these causes before the court of law.
When you talk of reclaiming temples, as a Hindu, one intuitively understands what it is that we want and we should get. But the temple played a very, very significant role in our ancient times. And since then, we have seen government control. And today, when you talk of reclaiming the temples, to what extent do you think the temple-centric civilization can come back, and to what extent is it feasible? Because other parallel structures have come up. Will the temple again be the center of culture, economics, prayer, religion, everything that it used to be? And do we really need it, and to what extent? Have you seen this thing through?
So, if you look at the life of an average Muslim or the life of an average Christian or even a Sikh, a significant amount of their lives revolve around their places of religion or their institutions of religion. And if at all there exists the concept of a social control through religion, perhaps I think the Abrahamic faith orders, so to speak, fit the definition much more than any other religious system. As far as the dharmic system is concerned, as opposed to calling it the Hindu system, I believe that it is less of control and more of realization on the part of the individual that not only is he an individual, he is also part of a certain unit, and therefore he has both rights as well as duties. And therefore I don't think, that this expectation to bring back the temple ecosystem back into the lives of Hindus is either far-fetched or unconstitutional or illegal or, let's say, anachronistic, because if it is possible for other faith systems, then why not for Hindus? Therefore I don't see this either as implausible or politically incorrect. It is as legitimate as any other cause can get. That's one. Now, with respect to the practicality of it, frankly, it's not as if the temple doesn't play a role. It already does. But perhaps there is a mental disconnect in the minds of the average Hindu with respect to the relationship between him and the temple, and he has relegated the temple to perhaps certain ornamental purposes or reasons, as opposed to realizing that it has a larger role to play. And gradually people are realizing it, because the average Hindu on the street, whether it's she or a he, effectively ends up asking this question: if tomorrow I as a Hindu am targeted for my identity, my religious identity, is there an institution that can come to my aid, particularly when the government, regardless of which dispensation is in power, doesn't seem to have the same kind of alacrity when it comes to reacting to Hindu causes? Perhaps the cause of a non-Hindu is easier to react to because the media will lap it up, but that's not the case with Hindus. So I think the only institution that can fill that void, and rightfully so, is the temple institution. And with states like Kerala and other places which are seeing rapid demographic inversion, they are beginning to realize that perhaps we should have strengthened the temple ecosystem much before in order to deal with these issues. So I do believe that whether we like it or not, the tide and march of history and time is forcing us to realize that it is the temple that can ultimately save the culture, save the civilization, and our way of life, so to speak. So I don't think it's going to be difficult for us to explain it to people. And I think the other side, so to speak, the left is doing a fantastic job of helping us raise awareness, thanks to episodes like Sabarimala, where I think it has given us an opportunity to tell people that if you don't listen to this wake-up call, I don't know what else will save you from the deluge that's coming your way.
When the Sabarimala verdict was going to come out, we knew it was either a case of women will be or will not be. That was binary. So we expected a judgment, and there was a dissenting voice. Now, for the layman, how do you explain, can you explain to us better the validity and the relevance of that dissenting voice within a judgment?
So one, since you're referring to the Sabarimala verdict, I'd prefer to use the term layperson as opposed to layman. So for the layperson, I think what is the legal significance of the dissenting opinion, and what is the the optical significance of the dissenting opinion, I think, must be clear. Legally, frankly, it is not binding. Uh, but there have been instances in judicial history, not just in this country but other countries as well, where some of these dissenting opinions have gone on to become the most influential opinions on those issues and have come to be cited in subsequent judgments and adopted by subsequent majorities. So you never know. So the minority of today can be the majority of tomorrow, and you can extrapolate that for any kind of situation, whether it is demographics or anything else. So it's only a question of time. It's only a question of circumstance and the opportunity that one sees in that issue. So the good part of this particular dissenting opinion, I think, is when the entire world was actually busy pitting the temple against women, three things happened. One, two tremendous organizations, People for Dharma, which was behind the Ready to Wait movement, and the Chetana, which is a women's organization based out of Delhi, they stepped up to the occasion and decided to represent those Indic female voices which believe in the tradition and don't see themselves as inferior or any less equal, and do not consider themselves as mentally subjugated to the, let's call it, the Hindu patriarchal system. They are as independent as any other woman, or much more independent than some men. And they did not want a patronizing voice to come out and say, we are your saviors and we'll save you. They said, we understand what the tradition is about perhaps more than anybody else, and we want the tradition respected because it is a question of faith. It is a question of our faith. So we don't want you to tell us that we are mental slaves. We know we are not. And that, I think, was extremely important. The fact that that position found one dissenting voice on the bench which endorsed their position, I think, is effectively a testimony of the skewed discourse that we have on feminism in India and elsewhere. Most importantly, it was the dissenting voice that decided to stick to the concept of judicial restraint, focusing on the fundamental requirements of a judicial process, asking basic cardinal questions such as the intentions of the petitioner, whether they had the locus to raise that particular issue, whether they had ever expressed a profession of faith or belief in Lord Ayyappa for them to seek access into that particular temple. And on these basic questions, she had come to the beautiful conclusion, and rightly so, that the petition deserved to be dismissed at the outset. And that, most importantly, that secular constitutional courts must think twice before donning the hats of theological institutions, because they may not have the wherewithal or the expertise to deal with those issues. And therefore, judicial activism or judicial sense of outreach must be tempered with and circumscribed by a significant amount of restraint, because you will be upsetting institutions which have survived for long and in which millions of people have a lot of faith. And the damage in some of these institutions and some of these institutions and their practices as a consequence of judicial activism could be irreversible, irreparable, and fairly harmful, and could also result in creating vociferous tendencies in the society, which I think was what you noticed immediately after the pronouncement of the verdict, where the first set of people to actually come out on the streets to protest against the judgment and condemn it, if I may use that without attracting the Contempt of Courts Act, were women of Kerala. And one of the things that I think that ought to have been done as part of the verdict in the composition of the bench is that if it is a Ram Janmabhoomi case, which also consequently has the Babri Masjid case, requires a Muslim judge to sit as part of the bench, then when you're looking into the practices of a temple that comes from a certain place and that subscribes to a specific school of thought, the Tantric school of thought, at least somebody from Kerala, or at least, at the very least, somebody from the south, should have formed part of that particular bench, so that there is a clear understanding. Because India is such a diverse country, nobody from one part of the country can really say that I understand and I appreciate and agree with the practice that is followed elsewhere. I don't think that's going to happen. So, unless and until somebody actually has the pulse on the Indian spirit, so to speak. So, it is better that we approach these issues with a fair amount of humility and realize that we may not know everything, and therefore it is best to have someone who perhaps has a better chance of knowing these things. In fact, if Justice Kurian Joseph or somebody else who was from Kerala had been part of this particular bench, I suspect that the outcome could have been vastly different. Because I remember that in one of the hearings when the petition was listed before him, before it went to the Constitution bench, he himself said that perhaps this petition does not merit a moment's scrutiny, because he himself has interacted with Ayyappa Swamis, so to speak, the people who observe the Diksha, and his relatives have hosted some of these Ayyappa Swamis during the Diksha period, so that they live alone they live segregated from their families and they're able to observe the vow. So I think that makes a lot of difference. And I'm not saying it must be necessarily a Hindu. It can be anybody from the south or anybody from this part of the country. Because I'm sure that a Kerala Muslim or a Kerala Christian perhaps knows much more about the temple and its practice because they have seen so many people around than anybody else from any other part of the country. So that I think could have happened.
So we have forums like the Litfest, Pondicherry Litfest. We have talks organized. There are Twitter wars and social media wars on what should be done and not done about the Indic cause. But what can the common man do to make a real difference?
So fora and platforms like Litfests, Twitter, Facebook at best provide a medium of dissemination, but if fundamentally action, content and experience is lacking, I don't understand what is it that we'll be disseminating ultimately. They are only conduits and channels. They are not crucibles for action. So perhaps writing helps, without a doubt. It helps shape opinion. But there must be some action on the ground for social and societal cogitation. So what I would suggest is a lot of people spend a lot of time whining on Twitter and Facebook assuming that their contribution to Dharma is done. They could do 2 or 3 things. Acquire certain skill sets, contribute to the cause in a way they can. Or at the very least start taking an interest in the nearest temple and see how the temple is managed so that they can comment based on experience as opposed to being armchair warriors. And people, especially the people with resources, who I think nature, God or fate or providence has blessed them with munificence, should perhaps hope to contribute with material support. Because you can produce as many Rana Prataps as possible, but unless and until there is a Bhamasha, it's difficult to fight these battles. So I think we should all do what we are cut out for and what we are good at, and not necessarily try and acquire those skills which perhaps may be outside the scope of our abilities, because then you'll be reinventing the wheel as opposed to doing the best of your ability. So I think this is a time for action. So my message is not that of passivity. Kshatra, Kshatra and Kshatra alone, action, action and action alone in one way or the other. That's my message.
Thank you so much for these inputs.